Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Authors Vox. Today, I am joined by Paul Toffanello, the excellent author of the Popchuck Chronicles, as you can see in the display behind him there. Paul, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks very much, Nick. And I'm really excited to be here today and to just share with you, my story, my backstory. Popchuck Chronicles was really an invention in the minds of two of my grade seven students, unwittingly not realizing that I was going to write a short story so I could get these two reluctant reading boys
Mhm.
to actually get into reading. But I started my writing, I'd say, back in 1984. I've been writing ever since. I've got the Popchuck Chronicles. There are three now published. A fourth one is just now in copy editing phase. So I'm hoping it'll be out. I'm hoping by Halloween, but probably not. More likely by Christmas. And I am in the middle of an adult novel, and I also write children's illustrated books. And I've created a wonderful little place called Blackburn Hamlet, where only spooky things happen. So it's been a lot of fun. Background: teacher, principal, superintendent, director of education, but always very strong in the area of literacy. And I had been one of the uh, directors of education who helped Dr. Avis Glaze form the Literacy and Numeracy Secretariat. So I've got a rife background in all these things and a great story to tell.
Amazing. It's always nice having fellow educators on this show because it does create some common ground that only I think only we as educators know.
Mhm.
Um, And, I'm going to start you off with an easy one. I ask everyone the same question when they're on the podcast for the first time, because this is a fantasy podcast more than anything else. Uh, what is your favorite magic system? Now, this can be from books, TV, movies, board games, video games,
Yeah,
anything you could think of.
it's funny when I thought about that question in preparation. I actually thought about what does a magic system look like, and in my world of writing, you're either dealing with hard magic or you're dealing with soft magic, and it's just examples might be Harry Potter, a bit harder in the magic because it's already there. The whole story opens up with, the magical happenings at the birth of Harry Potter and all that world sort of unfolding that way. I kind of prefer the softer magic, which is kind of like my books. The kids, as you read Popchuck's Ghost, they have no idea that ghosts exist. They have no idea as they move into book two that there are witches within their realm. They have no idea. So it just sort of softly comes to them. They become more aware of it. And I think that it just, for me, it feels a bit more wondrous as opposed to being automatically there. And I got to tell you, I loved fantasy and science fiction. Dune just threw me into the
Mm.
world of sci-fi, but there was a fantastical element to it. I loved Robert Heinlein stuff. I mean, I could move into those worlds so easily and capture everything. But I kind of got tired of the hard stuff. I kind of got tired of that. Knowing it ahead of time that I'm moving into this world, as opposed to it becoming something I was aware of, even as it's within my own midst. So I think if you ask me, I prefer that soft system. I think
Mhm.
that appeals to me a lot more because of the natural surprise element to it.
Yeah, that does make sense. And I will say, you did mention, I have forgot to show these yet, but I do have books one, two, and three right in front of me here. And after reading Popchuck's Ghost, moving into Popchuck's Revenge, I will say it did feel like a bit of a left turn, the introduction of witches, but also makes so much sense in the world that you've created with Camp Macabre and the other locations. But we talked about this very briefly, and you said you started writing in, I believe you said 1984, 1985. Was there anything specific that pushed you into writing? Was there any like moment where you're like, oh, I'm going to start writing?
Yeah,
Or
this is my favorite story, and I tell it to kids whenever I present at schools. I had these two kids, Robert and Alan. They were wonderful. I loved them. Grade seven. Uh, they were the first guys out in the rink in the wintertime shoveling. They were the first guys to help teachers move desks around. They were everybody's good friends. They were good athletes. But, neither one of those guys wanted to read a book to save their lives. As a matter of fact, whenever I did reading out loud in class, the first thing they'd do is put their heads on their arms and they literally fall asleep half the time. So it
Mm.
drove me crazy. And I got them through grade seven, but I mean, just narrowly. And I knew I was going to have them again in grade eight. And then something happened, which actually inspired me to become a writer that summer. And that summer, I became the uh, director of Camp Bickle, which is just outside of Timmins near Iroquois Falls. And Camp Bickle was or is a summer camp for kids that has a long history I won't get into right now. But it literally became the setting of my stories. But when I get there on that first Sunday and the bus comes rolling down the road, first two guys off the bus, Robert and Alan. Hey,
Hmm.
Mr. Toffanello, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I'm the director. And Robert looked at Alan, and Alan looked at Robert, and Alan said, well, thank God he can save us from the ghost. And I had no idea that Camp Bickle had a legacy of a camp ghost, that residential ghost. And so I knew immediately that they had an idea in their head. And having an English background and having been an English teacher, I thought, I'm going to write a short story for these two guys. I'll bring it back in September, and that'll be my first oral reading for the kids. Well, Nick, I sat down, and every night I had to stay up fairly late to make sure the kids weren't jumping out of their cabins.
Mm.
And I thought I was going to write 30, 40 pages, and I wrote, I'd say over 700, 750 pages on foolscap by hand, back and front. Eh? So I couldn't stop. I loved it. And it just, it was just something that I never realized I could do. So I always credit Robert and Alan for my becoming an author. And that's kind of my story. So I've been writing since the early 80s and, just continuing to love it.
That is nice to know. I myself also worked at a camp, um, similar to this one you've described. However, mine was over in forest. Um, when we talk about this, and this is a great example because the setup for Popchuck's Ghost is that two children, arrive at a camp and they find out about their cabin five, being haunted or of some uh, mystical attribute. The the series is really a great intro to some of the more broad horror themes that are traditional in mature horror novels. When we think about it, like the idea of murder, mystery, and
Yeah.
mayhem, to name a few. So when writing the series, it could have easily gone. You said with your 750 pages, could have easily gone the opposite direction and gone into a more classic horror novel. Why did you decide for like the YA genre, the younger readers?
Yeah, well, you know what? It actually sits more comfortably in the middle graders area. The book is sort of a bridge. It works best between grade five and grade eight, so you can sort of cross over with it. But for me, if you take a look at my style, uh, I had, of course, you'll know what I'm talking about, Nick. As a teacher, I knew these guys weren't going to be reading 4 or 5 or 6 pages in a novel at a time, but I knew they'd read two, and if I had a hook at the end of that chapter, they're going to read the next one, right? And so it was a bit of creativity meets logistics in terms of trying to grab them. At that time, back in my day, there was a book, and I forgive me, I forget the author's name, but it was called Hooked on Books. And one of
Mm.
the strategies was to find these short, really compelling stories that could excite a kid and lure them into reading. And so I maintained that. One of the authors who I somewhat emulated, although I didn't read a lot of him, was R.L. Stein, because he writes the very same way. he drags you into a very short chapter. By the end of the first chapter, you just want to know what the hell's going to happen next, right? And so I did that. And as a consequence, I kept that up because what happened later for me and why I go into schools all the time is because uh, I have a raison d'etre as an author to get kids reading again because it's just not happening. And we're getting further and further away from there. And honestly, it's affecting uh, education, it's affecting kids, it's affecting everything all the way through. So I don't know if I answered your question, but let me say this about the horror aspect. You know, the one thing that's consistent with these novels at this level and the horror genres are all those expectations of how we respond and react in uncertain arenas. You know, where all of a sudden Neil, who's the guy who's athletic, everything goes right for him. Now all of a sudden, he's got this atrium guy yelling at him. He's seeing stuff in the bush. He's so unnerved, and he doesn't understand what's happening to him, and he can't really trust his buddy, who's so afraid of being there to support him, which is why the introduction of Allie becomes so important, right?
Mhm. That did answer the question. That was actually the perfect answer, and does in fact answer a later question as well. But you're so right in the comparison to R.L. Stein. The Goosebumps series, even as I was, when I was younger, the Goosebumps series really had a hold on a lot of the readers in that age group. Um, and Oh, I have my questions here and they closed. My next question was one that you actually did answer already. But we do have, we have a lot of more, put this delicately, mature subject matter on this podcast a lot.
Yeah.
And we get to talk about the creative process for books like that, but we don't get to talk about the creative process for this type of book a lot. So when you're writing something like the Popchuck Chronicles, what does that creative process look like? Do you have to like go back and revisit a few spots? Are there areas where you find that you're how do I put this? You're making the matter too complex and too mature that you had to dial back a little bit, or maybe not mature and not complex enough, too simplistic that you had to
Yeah.
dial up a bit? What does that look like?
I really appreciate that question because I mean, if you're an informed reader, and in particular if you're a teacher and you read the three novels, what you'll see is that I'm attempting very carefully to the first book is a fairly easy read. Really short chapters, hook at the end of every chapter. I'm introducing new vocabulary and context so the kids don't even know they're learning new words. And it's a fun and softly spooky kind of a story that ends in what they feel is being victorious over the bad guy. Book two comes in, it gets a little bit more complex and a little bit more, you know, where the camp was sort of out of their control. Now, this whole thing is turning into their homes and their schools, and it's getting so invested in terms of who they are that it's creating even a little bit of conflict within the friendships, right? And it gets pretty dark towards the end. And then the third book involves, and I won't give anything away, but it certainly involves death, and it creates a much darker and much richer context for within which the kids are moving and have to make much more adult decisions. And the one thing I keep certain all the way through is the kids are always the ones who solve those problems, and it portends a little bit of growth for the characters that way. So I'm pretty careful about that stuff, and I will share with you book four is called uh, Talisman, and then the subtitle is Popchuck Returns, and the kids are in high school, and now it
Oh,
opens up with a lot of that teeny angst, at starting a
yeah.
new school. All of a sudden the friendship is dissipating a little bit. They don't know whether they can rely on each other, and so that's how it begins, and it moves there into an even more depth. But I will say this: I try to marry magic and science in that fourth book, and I think I hit one out of the park with it. So I'm really pumped to get that out. Yeah.
That's awesome because I'm only about halfway through Pop Chuck's what's the last one? Pop Chuck's
And
End. and I had to take a break because I've been moving. And
Yeah.
if you're listening to this and if you're hearing some slight disturbances in the audio, that's because I haven't quite figured out all of the bugs in my setup yet. Which is unfortunate because this interview, I believe, the points that Paul is making are fantastic. There have been no disruptions yet, as to my end, but please, all the tech gods available, please don't let that happen. Um, I'm very excited to get back to it once I have 5 minutes to stop building or putting up curtains or doing something. But the character I want to talk
If I
about
may,
is
Nick, if I may, I'm kind of glad you're not there yet because you don't know what I'm talking about. But there will come a point where it just gets. You'll say, "Oh my God, are kids
oh
reading
great.
this?"
Yeah.
Okay, so
Oh great. Then I'm really excited. I do just want to talk for a second about some specific characters though.
sure,
My first one I want to talk about is Adam. Now, Adam makes me laugh because he's both the most irritatingly skittish of the group, but
yeah.
also definitely the most reasonable person. Because I know as a child, if I saw a ghost, my first reaction isn't going to be, "Well, we have to find it." Like, absolutely not. Somebody call my parents. I'm leaving now. Um, he's a very clear contradiction to Neil's more gung-ho sort of, working towards the danger as opposed to running from it. uh when you were writing the novel, and you have said that some of these characters are based off of Robert and Alan, was there a time where Neil and Adam in the book were more similar, or were they always going to be that like stark contrast between the two of them?
Yeah, it's interesting, but I wanted to hold fast to that foil kind of a opportunity, you know, because I think that each of them learns from the other. I mean, where Neil comes off in the first couple of books as being sort of adventurous and in your face and everything else, slightly I begin to share that, he's not quite the academic that Adam happens to be. And so he's always falling back. There's always these little jokes. I mean, in book two, for example, or sorry, in book three, when they go to Salem, Massachusetts, and Allie says, "Well, boy, that door is beautiful," and Adam says, "Well, that's a portico." And
Mhm.
Neil turns around and says, "Portico?" He says, "Yeah." And then he describes what a portico is, right? That's kind of my reminder that, and in book four, same thing happens. They're in high school, they just finished studying uh, Taming of the Shrew, and Neil gets asked a question. Of course, he hasn't got a clue what the answer is, right? But
Mhm.
I love that they have to sort of they balance each other out, but they sort of rely on each other as well. And so I wanted to keep that and allow growth in both areas. And I think that I'm interspersing those uh, self-awareness elements as we move through it. So yeah, and I got to tell you, I know you'll ask this question. Most of my characters are actually characters from the kids that were at the camps those summer. Like Neil and Adam are the combination of four different boys. Um, Allie was based on my niece Allie, uh,
Oh,
and
okay.
she was just as precocious as hell, but she was confident and strong, and one of those characters that really needs to lead, right? And a lot of the names are names of the counselors that were there and stuff like that. So, I one of the things that the two things that when I go to schools, the two themes are: one, read, read, read because it makes you smart, and the second one is write what you know. And although I know a lot of authors don't necessarily ascribe to that, it's what I ascribe to, and it works best for me. I created the background for Popchuck's Ghost at Camp Bickle. I created the background for Popchuck's Revenge in Timmins. I used schools that I worked in or was familiar with. I used neighborhoods, homes. I mean, my house was Adam's house. So I didn't have to make these things up and remember them. I just look at my
Mhm.
house and just describe it the way I needed to describe it, right? So it takes away a little bit of the pressure of writing and allows me to be a bit more on work on the creative end. Here again, I apologize if I didn't answer the question, but I think maybe I did.
No, no, I think you answered 2 questions there for sure, and I think that's, they're both excellent answers. And Neil and Adam are great characters. They really are, and I like both of them. However, I would have to say Allie's character to me has made the most, I don't want to say the most drastic change because that's not true either, but it is a noticeable change. And what I'm talking about here is, she takes a lot of influence from her grandmother in the second book, and takes
Yeah,
definitely more of a traditional hero role throughout book two and book three, a
right.
little bit due to the circumstances, which I'm not going to like fully talk about, that occur at the end of book two, because I don't want anyone who's listening to this to have anything spoiled for them. But when you're making a character decision like that, um, what are some of the things you consider? Were future events suddenly something that needed to be reevaluated, or do you have to add more challenging stakes? And now that they're in high school, is there a big difference there? But what are some of the things when you have a character who makes a change like that? What do you consider when writing that character?
So, that's such an interesting question because I really thought hard about Allie, particularly because of the change that we're talking about. I knew I wanted her to eventually take on more of a leadership role. I sort of bought into the convention that girls tend to mature quicker than boys. And so you'll notice that she does have a bit more maturity and tends to rally the two guys because they're always flitting and fighting and all the other kind of stuff. But she also, if we harken back to what we talked about earlier, she was also my segue into the of using the soft magic to realize what was within their midst. And she, as you know, well, I won't say it because I don't want to spoil it, but she gained certain attributes that she probably wasn't aware of, and then comes to realize that the people she trusts most in the adult forms are in fact like like that, and she will now use their guidance to move forward. So it's it is a bit of a challenge sometimes because you have to really, as a writer, think about your characters and make sure you are consistent with them, but also illustrate how they grow. And it's not as if life presents you with oh, here's a circumstance, let's work through this. No, it's happening in the moment, and in each of those moments, what I used Allie for was to demonstrate that she could leap to a more mature level of decision than the boys could easier. And I don't want to generalize that about girls at any state, but I do think that that's how I rationalize it. Yeah.
Um, I think that's an excellent answer. Again, because as someone who's an educator, you have an opinion, not an opinion. You have a view of students that most people don't get. And I talk about this a lot. People don't read, and we get to see students grow from, into individuals from early on up until they leave high school or then go on to whatever. Um, so that understanding of your characters is something that's nice to see because it's realistic. You don't have, it's not like, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like fast fiction where it's someone is like, oh, it's just general terms applied to children. It's real. There's actual attributes of these characters that are present in everyday students, which people
Yeah.
respond to.
Yeah, and if I could, I think I mentioned to you before we got on the air that book four really is a clear demonstration of that because now they're in high school. And all of a sudden, the teen angst element comes to play. And that friendship, the three of them, it doesn't disappear, but it begins to dissipate around the edges. And the book opens up with Adam being somewhat isolated in the high school lunchroom, wondering where his friends are, kind of situation. So it opens up with some struggles to begin with, and that sets the tone for the novel.
That and
But it's in
which
keeping.
as I
It's in
can
keeping with who they are. Yeah.
Mhm. Which I was gonna say is I can attest that is how a lot of relationships go from grade 8 or
Yeah.
grade 8 to
Oh,
grade
for
9,
sure.
especially here in Ontario. I have 2 more book related questions for you, and then I have 2 uh, more open-ended questions for you, and then we will wrap it up here. Because I think I'm a little bit worried that the longer we go, the less my internet's gonna deal with me here. Um, so we briefly talked about that. We didn't. It was, I wouldn't say brief, but we did. You did mention you were a director for a camp, and one of the cornerstones of the first book, and then the rest of the books, is Charles Atram, the camp director for Camp Macabre. Um, when you're creating this person, I'm assuming you did not base him off of yourself, I would hope,
No.
because he is, yeah, yeah, the main antagonist. But when you were looking up, was there certain aspects you had to research about him, or was there an approach you took to writing him that's different than, say, writing Hilda Hattersmack, or
Yeah.
even Popchuck the Ghost?
I always try to identify my characters as somebody I know who have similar attributes or a collection of them. With Atram, and by the way, one of the things I do for kids as well as they read my books is lots of uh, double entendre or double meanings of names. So Atram backwards is morta, which in Italian is death, right? And Camp Macabre, if you pull it differently and spell it differently, it's a macabre, right? And
Mhm,
so there's a lot of that in my books just for fun, and I get kids to read through it. Atram, this is a funny little story. Atram is kind of Draculian. Like, Dracula was one of the spooky characters in my life. I went to see all the black and white movies. And, when I do my presentations at schools, I show clips from Frankenstein, where Frankenstein says, "It's alive, it's alive." And then I bring that into my book in a phone message on Neil's phone.
mhm,
But I also show that little piece of Dracula. And so that image is what I used. Now, I created a figure that could easily be, if you put longer hair on him, Snape from Harry Potter. And
mhm.
and I'll tell you, Snape was the perfect. And I'm sure J.K. Rowling read my first novel to create Snape. I'm almost 100% sure. But the funny story is that my book was Popchuck's Ghost was part of a ECCS book choice awards that I won about 5 years ago. And it was a school took on this from grades 4 to grade 8, took on this. They had listed all these books, and then each book went to a different level. And it came down to me and J.K. Rowling, first Harry Potter, and I won. I beat her, and I sent her a little note in on a witch call and said, "Hey, sorry you didn't win the most prestigious award. It was just a school. Right? Unfortunately, they liked my book better than yours, but she never got back to me." But getting back to the character development, I needed him to be mysterious, spooky, evil, and his evilness starts out again. Here we go. It's sort of slow, and they think he's just a bad guy, and his eyebrows are up, and he's just always perceptive and things like that. But eventually, especially in book 4, it just gets really, really scary stuff. And did I answer the question?
You did, yeah, yes,
Yeah. No,
yeah.
I think so, and I love that character. I love him.
Mhm.
So
I think he's very interesting, and I do like him. And I'm not gonna lie, the first book, I was up until I think about 3/4 of the way through, I was convinced that he wasn't actually a bad guy. And I was like, "Oh, the kids just misunderstand him." And I was like, "Oh, I no, he's a bad guy. He's a bad dude."
he's a bad guy.
I'm not normally wrong about that. And I was like, "Oh, I'm wrong. Okay, that's new." The other side of that coin, though, especially in the camp setting, is the character of Hilda Hattersmack, who is the uh, camp chef, or the cook, camp cook,
Yeah.
and is without a doubt the most helpful and wonderful character throughout the books. As she's the highest of highs, whereas Atrim is sort of the lowest of lows in terms of mood, right? Very always happy, very open, very in touch with her feelings. uh and then, you know there's a certain role or a certain goal she has through books 1 and 2 that's kind of achieved at the end of book 2. And then in like the first 20 pages of book 3, you've made a decision to do something which really threw me. And I guess my question is, do you just enjoy Hilda being miserable, or is that a personal choice? What's going
Well,
on
you
there?
know, without wanting to, well, spoiler alert, it's really important to remember the relationship between Popchuck and Hilda and how it happens. She lives her whole
Mhm,
life always having missed that opportunity to be with him. Then there's a connection at the end of book one. At the end of book two, there's somewhat of a reunion. Okay. But at the beginning of book three, and here's where I don't want to give it away, you know what happens. And as a consequence of that, there is a little bit of complex grief going on there because the there were only certain moments of being allowed to share that physical connection again. And so was there a bit of bitterness, a bit of resentment? I think you picked up on that tone. I don't know if kids would pick up on that, but having said that, I think that you haven't come to the part where there will be a realization of that reconnection, and that's
mhm,
the significant part that I think will, if I harken back to what we said earlier, will demonstrate to you how we move from a pretty fun, happy-go-lucky, spooky little, summer camp story to something that actually becomes life and death. Um, I was pretty careful about that. I think that, I accomplished what I was setting out to do. And the one thing I have to share, Nick, is that when
mhm,
kids ask me questions like, "What's your favorite book?" I have to say to them, "You know what? I don't have a favorite book." I said it's all one story in my head. This is one long story. I have favorite scenes, but I kind of always had the thread of where I wanted to go with this story in my head. So I think that it became that because of that, it became easier for me to allow it to unfold as it did, and then on the logical side of my head, allow kids to become better readers. Now they're reading longer chapters, and sometimes I don't. I'll put the new vocabulary in without context, and they'll have to kind of look it up, sort of thing. So
mhm.
basically, that's my. I don't have. I love Hilda. She is.
Yeah.
If you want to ask me who do I model her after, Mother Earth, right? Mother Earth with a firm grip on reality,
Mhm.
and yeah,
Um, there's so many points you just made that connect so beautifully to this next question, and I'm glad you made them. We talk about this a lot. You mentioned that I picked up on it, and young readers wouldn't, and a great deal of that is because of critical thinking and critical literacy skills that
yeah,
students are supposed to have. However, as I'm sure you are aware, is there's a massive literacy crisis going on all over North America. Getting students to read is the bane of my existence because they just won't do it.
yeah.
Both you and I are both from Ontario, or at least currently reside in Ontario, and we are seeing lower literacy rates than ever. And the government's decision around that was to just lower the goals. However, that won't help anything. So when you're in front of the classes, because you have a different perspective than everybody else I brought on here as well, is because you actually go in and talk to classes. So, you know, if you're standing in front of a class and a student asks you to give one good reason as to why people should be reading and writing more, what would you say?
Well, I actually talk about that. I break down that theme of read, read, read because it makes you smart by demonstrating to them that society measures your intelligence is really through IQ tests, as an example. And I say that
Mhm,
how you get a stronger IQ. I always tell them you learn new words. I said when you move from English to geography to science, every single one of those have a vernacular. Every single one of those have a different set of new words that you're learning. And as you learn those new words, your brain just absorbs all that stuff, and it naturally wants to do all the connecting pieces. I tell that to the kids, and I say to them, if you don't read, you won't become any smarter than you are right now. And I need you to read. And I always share with them, get away from the screen because that's not reading. You need to hold a book. And then more recently, in the past 4 years, as I shared with you earlier, I've been writing mostly for my kids and grandkids. I've been writing rhyming stories, and it's my new attempt to get into a classroom to read to kids in grades 2 and 3 to hook them into really fun stuff. And it's, I've created here's just an example. This is it's called Jerry Oliveri, and it's a real life situation of a kid who's a bully, right? And every kid knows what bullies are because they talk about bullies. And there's a bully awareness week, and we wear T-shirts for bullyingness. So I wrote a story about bulliness. But in Blackburn Hamlet actually exists in Ottawa. It's a little small part of Ottawa. I didn't know that at the time. So when I created this back in the 80s, I've got Trash Can Twilight. I've got Mum Letty's Ghost. I've got another one about a little boy who goes, I forget the name of it. My own story. A little boy who goes trick or treating one night and ends up in the graveyard. But each of the stories are relatable. And when I write with a natural rhyming that allows kids to remember end words. They can chorus some of the things. Teachers can do dramatic reading, all that kind of stuff. But it's my way of helping reintroduce the notion that we have to get kids excited about reading, not just reading. They have to be excited about it,
Mm.
And so when Jerry Oliveri, here just really quickly, if you don't mind, Nick, I'm just
Oh
going to
no,
read.
absolutely.
Yeah, in Blackburn Hamlet, there's a kid named Jerry Oliveri. All the kids in town avoid him. Jerry's pretty scary. He picks on little boys and girls around the neighborhood. He beats them up and steals their stuff and scares them really good. And so I have this, I have these characters in there, and they immediately understand who I'm talking about in that classroom. There's a kid in that classroom who does that stuff, right? Except this time,
Mm-hmm.
Jerry decides he's going to go into Blackburn Forest Park. He's going to run away from home because he doesn't think anybody cares anyway. So he's not scared of anything. But that eventually he meets a witch, right? And he learns a lesson. And at the end of the book, and if you don't mind, I'll just read this last page. It says, "Old Jerry Oliveri is the nicest guy in town. All the kids are unafraid. Old Jerry wouldn't let them down. He's kind and sweet and pretty neat and treats them all so well because Jerry Oliveri has a tale that he won't tell." Right? And so it encapsulates stuff they know, the real world around them, but it brings them into that short, early world of, I'm going to use horror because what happens to him there is horror, man. He just gets the, scare out of him.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, having said all that, that's basically my response. That we have. I'll tell you what. The other thing we have to do, Nick, we have to get teachers who read. We have to get teachers who write, because
Yeah.
if they're not reading and they're not writing, I don't care what area you're teaching. If you're not demonstrating to the kids, and then we need to get parents to read in front of their kids. And when the kid comes up to them and says, "Hey, mom, can you?" I want that mother to say, "Give me a second. I want to finish reading here." I want kids to know how important reading becomes to them. So you can tell I'm on this passionate mission, Nick? And hopefully I can keep it up for the next
As
few
you should be.
years. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say this is your time. I just want to tell a little personal anecdote here. As an English teacher myself, I do a lot of reading. Obviously, if you've been following the podcast, the people who are listening, I do reading. That's the whole point we're doing this. But a lot of the teachers I'd work with would say, I don't know when the last time I read a book for myself, not for class was. And I'm like, you're doing yourself a disservice. And
Disservice.
everyone I
Yeah.
know, everyone I know, nobody reads. Like I have friends who read, but that's like one or two people. Everyone else is like, I haven't read in 10, 15 years. You got to read. You have to
Yeah,
read.
you
That's how
gotta
you
read.
build
You gotta
empathy.
read. Yeah,
Yeah.
one of my I'll tell you a real quick story, and it's disappointing, but one of my daughters, and they're all old now, so this goes way back. One of my daughters was reading a novel. Oh, what the heck was it called? And it was more of an adult novel and everything else. And her teacher saw her reading it. Her English teacher, yeah, it was her language arts teacher because it was grade 7. And she said, "Oh, I'd like to read that." So my daughter gave it to her and lent it to her. And the next day she came back and said, you know what, it's a little bit too long for me. So, and I thought, she just didn't have any understanding of what influence that might have had on my daughter.
Hmm.
Thank God we're readers and
Yeah.
everything else. You know what? That's just one example. I know there's uh, thousands of really good teachers out there who actually know this and do this, and I appreciate them. And I'm here if you ever want to reach out, and have me come into their class live or virtual. I'm happy to do that.
Mhm. So we did have one more question, but I'm gonna cut it for the
Yep.
purposes of time here because we are getting close. So I'm gonna do the 10 rapid fire, and then
Sure.
we'll call it. So like I said before, it's just gonna be either or. You don't have to give a reason why. Just
Yep.
answer, and we'll get going. So first and foremost, paper and pen or computers when you write.
Both.
Fair enough.
I do
Um,
both. Yeah.
in that case, Microsoft Word or Google Docs.
Oh, word.
Word. TV or movies?
Movies.
Long novels or short novels?
Long novels.
Long novels. What was the next one? Board games or card games?
Board games.
Board games. Serial novels, like a bunch in a row, or a one shot.
One shot. Standalones. Yeah.
Fair enough. I'm gonna. This might be a little confusing. Retro TV. I'm talking like first Star Trek, the original series, or newer TV.
A bit of both, but probably newer TV.
Fair enough. Slasher horror or thriller horror?
Oh, thriller horror, please.
Thriller horror. That's a good choice. Let's see. Well, the other one was I have it on my desk. Kayaking or hiking?
Ooh, I love both. Yeah, I have to say both. I love both.
Hmm.
Yeah,
It's hard to choose. That one's a hard one. I will admit. Tea or coffee?
coffee.
And finally, Tim Hortons or Starbucks?
Tim Hortons all the way. Yeah,
Smart choice. Good man. Good man. That was Paul Toffanello talking about the Popchuck series. Now, normally I tell you to go pick it up for yourself, but what I am also going to say to you now is if you have someone who is younger and there's a birthday coming up, or if you want to surprise them or do something, go out and do them the service of buying the Popchuck Chronicles for them so they can get into reading. And if you're an educator and you're listening to this and you're in the elementary panel, primary, junior, whatever, um, get a class set. It will benefit your students much more than you realize. The themes in this book are both complex, but simple to understand for students. And there's a little bit always of a deeper dive. For instance, the atrium thing I didn't pick up on until you just said it, and I'm a teacher myself, so that's something to your credit.
yeah.
Paul, would you
If I
like
may,
to? Would
if
you
I
like?
may add to that, just real
By all
quickly,
means,
if you buy that class set, I'm coming in for free to do a presentation for you. So by all means, and you can only order through me or my website, thespookyauthor.com. So by all means,
spookyauthor.com.
Nick, I can't thank you enough for this. This is wonderful.
I I can't thank you enough for coming on here. This has been fantastic. And I apologize that you had to be the first person in my
Oh
new
no,
setup, which is not even set
yeah.
up. So
I'll
um
consider it. I'll
Paul, it's
consider it a
been great.
privilege. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Is there anything you want to plug other than the fourth novel you said's
Yeah,
coming out around
if you don't
Christmas? I
mind, just
personally
for
can't wait.
2 seconds, I am running a writers retreat up at that camp from Popchuck's Ghost in October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Terry Fallis will be our keynote, and there are four northern writers who are going to be guest speaking as well, and we're just going to have a heck of a lot of fun. So it's just called harvestmoonretreat.com, and we'd love to see all the writers at any level coming out and joining us for sure.
Even better. If you're listening to this and you've been a guest on Authors Vox, you should absolutely sign up for that. And if you're listening to this and you just want to learn how to write or learn how to write better or just be amongst writers, by all means, please sign up.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Paul, thank you so much for coming. And it has been such a privilege and such a pleasure talking to you today about Pop Chuck.
Thank you very much, Nick. Same. Talk
Okay.
soon. Keep in
Stay
touch.
magical, my friends, and I will see
I
you
will.
all in the future.
Will do.